on the galaxy's most dangerous planet. Not because you broke a law, but because you survived something you weren't supposed to see. No weapons, no backup, just your will to live, and a world that wants you dead. But what if, in the heart of that death world, you discovered a secret so powerful it could shake the stars? This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of truth, courage, and the fire that makes us human. If you are new here, then please subscribe to this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. Lieutenant Kieran Hale stood in the center of a cold metallic chamber, surrounded by towering beings whose faces betrayed no emotion. The Galactic Tribunal, 7 members strong, loomed over him from their elevated seats. Their features varied. One, covered in feathers that shimmered with gold, another with eyes like molten glass, and a third who resembled a walking tree wrapped in vines. They were silent for a moment too long, making the space feel like it was closing in on him. Kieran's hand stayed at his sides, clenched just tight enough to keep from shaking. He tried to hold their gaze, even as the pressure in the room grew heavier. A judge with scales that glittered like wet stone finally leaned forward. Her voice, filtered through a translator, echoed cold and clear. Lieutenant Hale, you are charged with violating Ecological Protocol 7-2. Your actions led to the irreversible collapse of the Larvian Mist Reef, a sacred ecosystem to the Grell species. Kieran blinked. With respect, that reef was already dying. The entire area was on the verge of collapse due to industrial runoff from consortium mining operations. I was trying to stabilize it, not destroy it. A chorus of disapproving murmurs followed his words. The oldest judge, a towering figure draped in a robe of living moss, tapped a long finger against his console. Your intent is irrelevant. Your interference disrupted a process under protection. The life forms affected may now be extinct. Kieran exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to shout. I was sent there to help. The equipment I used came from consortium stores. If something went wrong, it wasn't sabotage. It was malfunction. Another judge, this one barely visible within a foggy sphere of mist, spoke up. Negligence is not innocence. You acted without permission. That qualifies as breach of interplanetary stewardship. Kieran couldn't believe what he was hearing. After years of service as a soldier and now as a diplomatic officer, this was how it ended. A trial without evidence. A room full of beings who had already made up their minds. Still, he kept his voice level. If this was so serious, why not issue a formal inquiry? Let humanity defend its position? We did, the feathered judge said sharply. Your government acknowledged the error but deferred to consortium law. You are being held accountable as the officer in command. Kieran felt something inside him crack, like a glass splinter under pressure. So what's the sentence? Hologram flickered to life above the tribunal, showing a planet drenched in red and orange storms. Dark forests twisted in unnatural shapes. Rivers glowed faintly under storm-choked skies. The image made his stomach turn. The mist judge spoke again. Planet designation: Verganth, a Class 9 death world. The room fell silent. Kieran's jaw tightened. You're banishing me? Not banishment, corrected the tree-like judge. A test of survival. 1 standard galactic year. If you endure, your charges will be cleared. And if I don't? Then the matter concludes, said the feathered judge without emotion. Kieran shook his head in disbelief. That planet is unlivable. No species has lasted more than a few days there. How is this justice? The moss-robed judge leaned forward, slightly. Your species claims adaptability. This will be your chance to prove it. You're using me as an experiment, Kieran said quietly. An opportunity, the mist judge replied. A cleaner solution. Diplomatic, not execution. But effectively the same. Kieran muttered. You're just letting the planet do the killing. The feathered judge nodded slowly. As is its nature. The screen above them shifted to show atmospheric readings, poisonous air, fluctuating gravity, unpredictable tectonics, and a biodiversity that seemed built to hunt. Everything about Verganth was wrong, and Kieran knew he was being sent there to disappear. "Do I get any supplies?" he asked. "Basic survival kit," said the moss-robed one. 30 days of nutrient capsules, water purification device, environmental scanner, plasma tool, and an emergency beacon. Non-functional until the term ends. Kieran gave a bitter laugh. "How generous." "Most species receive less," said the feathered judge. "You are being treated with fairness." Didn't answer. The word fairness didn't belong in this room. It was just a performance, justice repackaged for interstellar politics. His own people had already accepted it, apparently, eager to stay in the good graces of the consortium. Kieran didn't even know if anyone had tried to stop this. Had his commander spoken up? Had anyone sent a message of protest? He stood straighter. "When do I leave?" "Transport departs in 5 hours," replied the judge. "You may send final transmissions if you wish." Kieran gave a stiff nod, then turned without being dismissed. No one stopped him. Hours later, the launch bay was quiet except for the hum of power cells and the occasional hiss of coolant gas. The drop pod looked more like a coffin than a ship. Small, compact, and built for one. Kieran ran his hand along the cold hull before stepping inside. He strapped in and took one last look at the stars above. "Ready for descent," came the voice of the onboard AI. Kieran didn't respond. His heart was already racing. As the engines ignited and the pod detached from the docking clamps, he watched the stars vanish and a swirling storm rise to meet him. The screen ahead displayed Verganth's surface. Even from orbit, it looked alive with danger. The AI spoke in a calm voice. "Entry sequence engaged. Atmospheric turbulence expected. Please remain seated." "No kidding," Kieran muttered. Flames licked the view outside as the pod tore through the upper atmosphere. The G-forces pressed against his chest, but he kept his eyes open. This wasn't the end, he told himself. He would make it. Not just because he had to, but because someone needed to. Maybe not for redemption, maybe not even for justice. Just to prove they were wrong. The impact was violent. The drop pod slammed into the ground with a force that knocked the breath out of Kieran Hale's lungs. He was thrown against the harness, his shoulders aching, his vision blurred. When the pod finally came to a stop, tilted awkwardly on one side, silence followed. Not the comforting kind, but a heavy silence, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to step outside. Warning lights blinked on the control panel. A voice, too calm for the situation, crackled through the pod's speakers. "Landing complete. Environmental conditions are unstable. Caution is advised." Kieran groaned and unbuckled himself, his muscles stiff from the descent. He pushed open the emergency compartment beside his seat and pulled out the survival kit. Inside were the essentials they'd promised: 30 nutrient capsules, a water purifier, an outdated plasma knife, and a beacon locked behind a timer, set to activate in exactly 1 galactic year. There was also an environmental suit, not a full one, but enough to filter the worst of the air and protect him from exposure for a few hours at a time. It wasn't enough, and they all knew it. He forced the pod's hatch open. A rush of hot, sulfuric air hit him instantly. The suit's filters buzzed to life. Outside, the world was a mess of red mist, jagged black stone, and twisting trees that looked like they had grown with pain. The ground sizzled in places, bubbling from beneath like something angry was trying to get out. The sky above was filled with swirling orange clouds. Lightning cracked across the horizon, flashing just long enough to reveal distant, crawling shapes too large to identify. He'd seen deserts, jungles, even war zones in his time, but nothing like this. This planet didn't want visitors. It wanted victims. Kieran stepped down from the pod, his boots crunching against loose gravel and hardened ash. Every step echoed in the stillness. It didn't feel like walking on ground, it felt like walking across something's back. He checked the scanner. The air was thick with chemicals, most of them harmful. Oxygen was present, but barely. Without the filters, he'd be dead in minutes. The temperature was rising fast. Not from sunlight, there didn't seem to be any, but from the planet itself. The heat came from below as though Verginth had a fever it couldn't shake. He moved quickly. Rule number 1. Never stay in one place. If this planet had predators, and everything suggested it did, his crash site would be like ringing a dinner bell. The pod's metallic scent, the heat from its engines, even the noise it had made on impact would attract attention. He slung the supply bag over his shoulder and headed toward what looked like a rock formation in the distance. Jagged pillars, tall and sharp, stood like the ribs of a long dead beast. Maybe they'd offer cover. Maybe they'd be his grave. Either way, he couldn't stay out in the open. As he walked, he noticed how quiet the world was. Not peaceful, but unnatural. No wind, no birds, no rustling in the bushes. Only the occasional distant rumble, like thunder far beneath the ground. Even the trees didn't move. Their bark was rough and pitted with strange circular growths that looked like closed eyes. He didn't touch them. Twice he had to stop and hide. Once, when a shadow passed overhead. He never saw what it was, only the brief flicker of wings and the sharp drop in temperature as it flew by. The second time, something large moved through the rocks ahead of him, snapping a thick tree trunk like a twig. Whatever it was didn't see him, but the way the ground shook with each step told Kieran everything he needed to know. Survival here wouldn't come from fighting. It would come from staying invisible. After hours of climbing, slipping, and ducking, through narrow passes he found a cave tucked beneath one of the towering stone arches. It wasn't deep, but it had a natural curve that would block him from view. The scanner beeped softly. Air inside was still toxic, but less so. The rocks here seemed to absorb the chemicals in the air. Maybe he'd found the one corner of Verginth that didn't want him dead. Yet, he collapsed inside the cave and finally let himself rest. His back ached, his legs burned, and his hands were scraped raw. He popped one of the nutrient capsules and drank from his purifier. The water tasted metallic, but it was wet and it didn't kill him. That was enough. He leaned back against the stone and stared at the ceiling. Faint bioluminescent lines shimmered above, like veins running through the rock. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe he might survive this. Not for the tribunal, not for the law, but for himself, for the stubborn spark in him that refused to be snuffed out. Just as he was starting to drift into sleep, a low growl echoed through the cave. He froze. The sound came from deeper within, beyond where the light reached. He gripped the plasma, knife its glow weak but reassuring. The growl came again, followed by a heavy dragging sound. He held his breath. Then silence. Maybe whatever it was had passed by, or maybe it was still there, waiting. Kieran didn't move. The cave, once a place of safety, had become a trap. He could try to run, but he didn't know the terrain well enough. And outside was no safer. He stayed there for hours, unmoving, listening to every sound. Eventually, the noise faded. The thing, whatever it had been, was gone, or it was hiding better than he was. He stayed in the cave the rest of the night, though night was a loose term. The sky never truly darkened, just shifted from stormy orange to deep rust-colored gloom. When he finally stepped out again, the ground was wet with something that smelled like chemicals and old blood. Small creatures, long and thin with too many legs, scattered at his approach. The world was still watching him, judging, waiting, but he was still alive. And that, Kieran thought, was more than they'd expected. Kieran didn't know how many days had passed. On Verginth, time was meaningless. The sky never cleared, the storms never stopped, and the planet seemed to shift under his feet every time he thought he had found stable ground. Sleep came in short, broken pieces, and he only ate when he was sure he wouldn't be chased mid-bite. He had moved from the first cave after hearing the growls again, closer this time and followed by the crack of stone like something clawing its way through. Since then he had avoided enclosed spaces, sleeping instead in the roots of strange trees or under natural overhangs, where he could see and hear anything coming. He was tired, not just physically, but deep in his bones. The kind of tired that made you question whether continuing was worth it. But every time that thought crept in, something inside him, old training or maybe just raw human stubbornness, pushed it back down. He hadn't come to this death planet by choice, but if he was going to die, he wanted to die on his feet. Not curled up in a hole, waiting. The storms had grown worse. They moved in fast like living creatures, swirling orange clouds that dropped, bursts of acid rain and lightning so hot it turned sand to glass. During one of these storms, Kieran was forced to take shelter in a narrow canyon carved through a wall of jagged stone. He didn't want to go down into it, but there was no choice. The wind outside had begun lifting debris the size of his arm, and his suit's alarm had started beeping warnings about exposure. The canyon was dark and narrow, the walls close enough to touch on both sides. His boots slipped on wet rock as he moved, careful not to fall. At the bottom, the air grew cooler, quieter. The storm above sounded distant, muffled by the layers of stone. He turned on his small scanner to check for toxins, and that's when he saw it. A faint signal. Not just background noise, but something structured, rhythmic. It pulsed once every few seconds, just at the edge of the scanner's range. Kieran's heart jumped. No animal would give off a signal like that. It had to be technology. A beacon, a drone, a trap. He didn't know. But it was the first sign he wasn't alone. Curiosity beat out caution. He followed the signal deeper into the canyon, past collapsed tunnels and old stone arches that looked almost carved. Some of them had markings, symbols etched into the walls that time and weather hadn't erased. They weren't human, but they were deliberate, intelligent. The signal grew stronger until it led him to a hidden crevice behind a rock slide. It was just wide enough for him to squeeze through. Beyond it, the space opened into a large underground chamber, dry and untouched by the surface storms. Faint blue lights glowed along the ceiling like the stars he hadn't seen in days. And there at the far end stood a figure. She was slight, no taller than Kieran's shoulder, and her skin shimmered with a faint, silvery hue. Her eyes, large and dark, blinked slowly as she looked at him. She held something in one hand, a tool or a weapon, he couldn't tell, but she didn't raise it. Instead, she stepped back, her posture cautious, but not hostile. Kieran didn't speak right away. His voice was dry from lack of use, and he wasn't sure she would understand him. "Hello," he finally said, his voice echoing in the cavern. The figure tilted her head. "You're not from here," she replied. Her voice was soft, melodic, but carried a clear weight behind it. Fluent galactic standard, perfect. "Neither are you," Kieran said carefully. "Not anymore," she said, lowering the device in her hand. "I was born here, but my people are long gone." He stepped closer, keeping his movements slow. "I didn't think anyone lived here." "Most don't," she said, "but some survive." Kieran introduced himself, and she told him her name was Nyla. Her species had once been part of the Galactic Council, long before humans were even known. They had used Verganth as a research outpost, studying the planet's strange energy and its effect on living organisms. But something had gone wrong. The planet had changed, grown hostile, not naturally but as a reaction to what her people had tried to take. Nyla had been a child then, the last survivor of the collapse. She'd lived in hiding for years, relying on the old technology her ancestors had left behind. It kept her alive, barely, and shielded her from the worst of Verganth's wrath. But she had never seen another living person until Kieran. He listened, stunned. "Why didn't you try to leave?" "I tried," she said. "Many times. But the council doesn't want this place disturbed. Anyone who leaves with knowledge is silenced." Kieran realized the truth slowly. His exile wasn't just about punishment. It was about erasure. He had seen something he wasn't meant to see. He was disposable. And if Nyla was right, others had been sent here before. Not to test survival, but to disappear quietly. He told her about his sentence, about the tribunal and the false fairness of it all. Nyla didn't look surprised. "They fear your kind," she said simply. Your species adapts too fast. You survive what should be impossible. They couldn't risk you learning what's buried here. Kieran's mind raced. If this was true, if the Council had hidden an entire planet to cover up a mistake, then this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth. About justice. "Why help me?" he asked. Nyla looked at him for a long moment. "Because you're still alive. And because you remind me of someone I once knew. Someone who believed things could be different." He didn't know what to say to that. So he nodded. "Then let's make them different." For the first time since landing on Verganth, Kieran felt something he hadn't dared to feel before. Not hope. Not yet. But purpose. And that was enough. The days that followed felt different. Kieran Hale no longer walked the broken lands of Verganth with only survival in mind. Now, every step had meaning. He and Nyla moved together, quiet and careful, their eyes always scanning the storm-filled skies and restless terrain. It wasn't just about staying alive anymore. It was about finding answers, maybe even a way to fight back. The truth Nyla had revealed shifted everything. This planet wasn't a prison by chance. It was a carefully buried secret, one the Galactic Council had gone to great lengths to erase. And now they weren't just two survivors. They were witnesses. Nyla led him deeper into the old ruins. The entrance had been hidden behind a cliffside thick with thorny vines that stung if touched. They had to use the plasma knife to carefully cut through them inch by inch. The passage beyond dropped sharply into darkness and the air turned cool and stale. Kieran's suit kept him protected, but he could feel the tension in the air. The hum of old machines still holding on after centuries. The walls were smooth, etched with glowing patterns that shifted slowly like they were alive. He had never seen anything like it. They reached what Nyla called the core, a large circular chamber filled with dormant consoles and humming energy lines that pulsed like veins. In the center stood a tall pillar made of black metal, cracked down the side, leaking a soft blue glow. This was where it had all started. Long ago, her people had discovered something beneath the planet's surface, an energy unlike any the galaxy had seen. It wasn't fuel, and it wasn't alive, not in the traditional sense. But it reacted to thought, to emotion, and it changed the world around it. They hadn't understood it, but they had tried to use it anyway. Kieran walked around the pillar slowly, feeling the weight of it. "What happened?" he asked. "They pushed too hard," Nyla said, her voice quiet. "The energy resisted, it fought back. Not with violence, but with change. It reshaped the planet, turned everything dangerous. And when my people tried to leave, the Council ordered the project shut down and the truth sealed. Why not destroy it? They were afraid. They couldn't control it. But they also couldn't risk someone else finding it and doing what they couldn't." Kieran looked at the controls surrounding the core. Most were dead, but a few still blinked with dim lights. "What does it do now?" "It listens," Nyla said. "It watches. Maybe it's waiting." Kieran placed a hand against the pillar. It was warm, pulsing beneath his fingers like a heartbeat. A strange calm settled over him, just for a second. Then it passed. He stepped back. "We can't leave it like this. They sent me here to die, to keep this buried. But if they fear what we could do, that means we have power." Nyla nodded. "And that means we have a choice." They spent the next days trying to restore the communications panel in the chamber. Nyla had a small transmitter that she had once used to send weak signals, but nothing had ever answered. Together they connected it to the remaining power nodes and rerouted energy from backup systems. It was slow work, dangerous even. Some machines sparked with unstable energy. Others responded to their presence by shutting down entirely. But piece by piece, they brought the console to life. On the 7th day, it powered up fully. A soft hum filled the room and a faint green light blinked on the display. Kieran adjusted the frequency, tuning it to a human emergency channel. He spoke clearly, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "This is Lieutenant Kieran, Hale of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I have survived. And I have something to show you. They sent the message 3 times, then waited. The room felt heavier, like the planet itself was listening. Nyla sat beside him in silence, her eyes never leaving the display. Hours passed. Then, without warning, the console lit up again. A new message appeared on the screen. Short, but clear. Message received. Rescue en route. Hold position. Kieran stared at the words, then looked at Nyla. They heard us. She smiled, tired but bright. Then it begins. They knew it wouldn't be easy. The council wouldn't let this go without a fight. If a ship was coming, it would bring more than help. It would bring attention, and with it, danger. But Kieran wasn't afraid. They had survived the worst planet in the known galaxy. They had found truth buried in lies. And now, they had a chance to change everything. They spent their final hours preparing. Nyla packed what she could carry: data crystals, documents, fragments of knowledge too important to leave behind. Kieran kept watch outside the cavern, eyes scanning the skies. The storm seemed to pause, as if the planet too was holding its breath. Then, just as the second sun dipped behind the distant cliffs, a shape appeared above the clouds. Sleek, silver, and unmistakably human. The rescue ship descended slowly, kicking up dust and sparks as it landed on a clear patch of ground. The hatch opened and a team of people stepped out. Humans in dark uniforms, their eyes wide as they took in the sight of Kieran Hale, standing on a world where no one was meant to survive. He didn't speak at first. He just nodded toward the canyon behind him. There's someone else, and there's something you need to see. They returned with Nyla and what pieces of evidence they could carry. As the ship lifted into the sky, Kieran watched Verganth shrink beneath them. The storms began to stir again, but slowly, almost gently, as if the planet was saying goodbye. Back on the ship, the commander asked the question Kieran had been expecting. What do you want to do now? He thought about it for a moment. I want to tell the truth. And he did. Kieran Hale became more than an exile. He became a voice. Not for revenge, not for war, but for honesty, for courage, and for the unknown. His story reached far beyond the stars, reminding every species, every world that the human spirit, tested, bruised, and thrown into the worst, never breaks, not even on a death planet.